Good morning, dealers. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us. My name is Haley Holland, and I'm the Marketing Program Manager here at ARI. I'm excited to be joined today by Fran O'Hagan, CEO of Pied Piper, who will be talking to us about the best ways to reach customers and best online practices. But before we move forward, I just wanted to point out the control panel on the top corner of your screen, which you can minimize at any time by hitting the orange arrow. You can also submit questions throughout the webinar in the question section of the control panel, as we've reserved some time at the end to answer as many questions as we can. So today, dealers, Fran's going to be reviewing many ways you can practice best online customer outreach, ways e-commerce is on the rise, and how a customer interacts with your store online, and the best ways to drive sales, ultimately so we can help you sell more stuff. So again, my name is Haley Holland, Marketing Program Manager here at ARI. I've worked with dealerships and manufacturers across the nation to help develop business and marketing plans to accelerate their results and in turn yield a higher ROI. And with that said, I'd really like to introduce you to Fran O'Hagan. Good morning, Fran. How you doing? Good. So folks, Fran O'Hagan is the CEO at Pied Piper Management Company, founded in 2003 in the sunny state of California. Pied Piper helps dealerships and manufacturers improve the performance of their retail networks. Their objective is to get higher retail sales, higher market share, higher profitability, and higher customer loyalty. Fran, I'm really excited to have you on today to speak to our dealers.
Hey, thanks.
Thank you. So Fran, I know e-commerce is a popular topic amongst dealers. I know we're all curious to get the most out of selling online. Could you tell us how e-commerce is on the rise?
Sure. Haley, that's a great place to start. And, I want us all just to think about the iPhone or the Android that all of you online probably have either in your hand right now, or it's probably very close to you. It was only a little more than 10 years ago that Apple introduced the iPhone. It's amazing to think about. That year when Apple introduced the iPhone, Amazon did 15 billion in sales. And last year, Amazon did 280 billion in sales, which just is a great reflection on how everybody orders online. Today, it's just under 2 billion people worldwide who purchase goods online. And the fact here is that 63% of all purchases today begin online, all purchases of all kinds. So that gets us to today and our current world, which is crazy. I mean, if you think about it, even 2 or 3 weeks ago, we couldn't imagine that we would be in the predicament we're in with coronavirus. We have an economic slowdown. Many of you are in places where it's shelter in place. Schools are closed, there are layoffs. A lot of people are working from home. So the question is, what impact does that current situation have on all of you, have on dealerships? Well, the data shows us that year over year, compared to last year, website visits were generally up. For outdoor power equipment, it was about a 20% increase in website visits versus last year. And for power sports, it was pretty flat. Customers are spending more time browsing online right now. And what we can look at is what happened in China. When China did that lockdown, they saw a 21% increase in daily internet traffic. We're likely to see the same sort of thing. Customers are going to be spending a lot of time online. So data shows us that the leads are generally 10 to 30% lower than before the pandemic. No question that coronavirus is causing a drop-off in leads. However, that drop-off began the second week of March, but then after that, it's leveled off. And if you just think about it, we have customers at home. What are they thinking about? Well, hopefully they're thinking about tractors and UTVs and motorcycles and other equipment. The point is, right now, every lead matters, and dealers need to convert as many of those leads as possible. We're going to talk about that over the next half an hour or so. How can you do that? Your front door for many of you may be locked for sales, but the website is definitely open. Now, I don't want you to think of the initial customer contact online as a chance for you to sell a vehicle. I want you to think of that initial contact as meeting a customer for the first time by email. So if you think about it, if a customer walks through the door of your dealership, you're not going to grab them and say, what will it take to get you to buy today? You're going to say to them, hey, I see you're wearing a New York Yankees cap, or hey, I see you drove up in that F-350 dually. You must tow something with that, right? You're just talking with them. You're making a positive first impression. It's the same thing with your first response to them. You're meeting a customer for the first time, which is why it's so important for you to listen carefully to what they're saying, either what they've written in their lead or when you're talking with them on the phone. 19 out of 20 customers that you have, they still want to visit the dealership as part of their purchase, when they can, of course. All right, industry studies tell us that the buying cycle increases during a downturn. In other words, it takes longer. So a transaction from the first time you see the customer to when you actually deliver a vehicle, if it used to be 2 days or a week, maybe it's going to be 4 days or 2 weeks now. Now, importantly, customers are going to remember the brands and the dealers who stick with them during these tough times, who reach out to them.
Absolutely. That's an excellent point, Fran. I know customers will definitely remember those dealers and brands who stuck with them throughout the tough times. So I think it's a good opportunity to dive into how today's shoppers are shopping online. What is a customer's typical experience? And how can a dealership continue to stay competitive in this difficult time?
So let's think of this. Let's think through the eyes of a customer. What happens today when a power sports or outdoor power equipment customer tries to contact a dealership through the dealer website? What's their experience today? And also, very importantly, does how the dealer responds make a difference to whether the customer ends up buying? We're going to answer that too. But first, I want you to consider what happens when a customer walks out of a restaurant or they look out their window and they see a pickup truck with a trailer towing one of these things, a UTV, or maybe they see a customer towing a tractor. And they look at it and they say, that looks like fun, maybe I should get one, or that looks like it could do a lot of work for me, maybe I should get one. What happens next? They go to in their hand, they're holding their iPhone or their Android. They go to their phone, they do a Google search, they find a local dealer, they see that the dealer has the vehicle in stock that they're interested in, and then they think, I wonder if I can tow that with my truck, or I wonder if I can tow a trailer with that UTV, or I wonder if I can get a backhoe attachment for that tractor. They ask the dealer a question following the dealership's website instructions, and then what happens? What happens is this: they ask the question on the dealership website, and then 60 minutes comes and goes, and for 3 customers out of 4, there will be no personal email response. 1 customer in 4 will receive a personal email answering their question. That's the first 60 minutes. If we wait 24 hours, we find that 1 more of the 4 customers will receive a personal email answering their question. That leaves half of the UTV customers, and you can substitute other products for UTV as well. Half of them, these customers will still be waiting for a reply after 24 hours. That's what happens industry-wide today.
Wow, Fran, that's a lot of customers that are going without an answer. So can you tell me, how does Pied Piper know that these customers have not received an answer? And what can dealers do to get in contact with more of their prospective clients?
So that gets us to Pied Piper's prospect satisfaction index. That's how we know. So back in 2007, Pied Piper developed a way to measure how effectively dealerships sell. We wanted to know the facts. We wanted to know the math. What specific sales behaviors drove shoppers to turn into buyers? It's called prospect satisfaction, or PSI. We use it to measure in-person selling, but we also use this approach to measure online selling. We call that internet lead effectiveness, or ILE. So some of you may be familiar with Pied Piper already, because many dealerships already use ILE reports to measure and improve how their sales team responds to customer web inquiries. But we want to talk about this. We want to talk about what the ILE data tells us about how dealers respond to online customers and how their response drives sales. And before I do that, we measure tens of thousands of dealerships every year. So Haley's question, hey, how do we know what happens when customers reach out to dealers? That's how. So think of this. When we provide ILE measurement and reporting, the ILE scores range from a 0 to a 100, 0 being terrible, 100 being perfect. But I want you all to think of two numbers, 30 and 70. So dealers who fail to answer the customer's question, maybe they send out an autoresponder and that's all they do. They score under 30. And if we contrast that to dealers who quickly email an answer, let's say within 30 minutes, and they also immediately phone the customer, those dealers will score over 70. So we have a group of dealers scoring under 30. We have a group of dealers scoring over 70.
That's really interesting. So, Fran, I think there are many dealers out there who struggle to make time to call and email a customer back. Is it worth the effort then to phone and email quickly to close more sales? And second question, how does improving website customer handling translate into incremental sales?
So absolutely, it's worth improving the way that your sales team responds to web inquiries. And here's the math. Dealers whose ILE score is over 70, in other words, they quickly email an answer to the customer's question and they also phone the customer. That group of dealers, they sell 44% more units to the same quantity of website customers contacting them compared to the dealers whose ILE score is less than 30. So yes, it's absolutely worth the effort. And to put it in perspective, there are definitely dealers who currently score over 70. Using the Harley-Davidson network as an example, almost a third of their dealers currently score over 70. But, you all should be asking me the question, hey, industry-wide, what's the average performance today? These two numbers, 70 and 30. Well, I'll tell you this, industry-wide, half of UTV dealers have ILE scores under 30. And you can substitute UTV for compact tractor and other products as well. So half of the dealers out there are scoring under 30 right now. Only 5% are scoring over 70. So we know it's really important. We know that dealers who improve sell a lot more units. And also, yes, there's plenty of room for improvement industry-wide.
Right. Yeah, this is all really good to know. And seeing exactly how the data shows that a higher ILE score will yield higher sales. But before we switch gears here, I see a lot of questions coming in, and that's awesome. Thank you so much, listeners. And it seems like many of the questions are asking if we'll be sharing a copy of the webinar, The answer is yes. You all will receive a recording of the webinar following the conclusion. So don't worry, we'll get you a copy. And keep those questions coming in. They look great so far. We have reserved time at the end to answer as many as we can. So Fran, I want to switch gears here and talk to our listeners about how they can make best practices a habit. Any advice for our listeners?
Absolutely. So here's where to start. First of all, set behavior targets for your dealership. In other words, how often do you expect your team to reply? Is it once a day? Is it in 60 minutes? And also be determined and vigilant. We saw the numbers. We know this is a top priority, but we also know that this part of the business is out of sight, out of mind. You have to keep paying attention to it. The second part is measure and track whether your team is consistently hitting the targets that you set. And some of you already receive ILI reports from Pied Piper. If you do, use those reports to shine a light on what your customers are really experiencing. You know what your team is supposed to be doing. Let's make sure that your customers are really seeing exactly what your team is supposed to be doing. Also, dealers who need improvement, and that's at least half of the dealers out there, they use these ILE reports as what I will call a fix-it tool. They're working to improve their process. In contrast, there are also top performing dealers out there who have a great process. They use these reports as what I'll call a burglar alarm tool to quickly identify when something breaks in their process. Now, if you don't remember anything else from this webinar, I want you to remember this. Don't go home at the end of the day with digital customers locked up in your dealership any more so than you would go home. You'd flip the lights off and go home at the end of the day with real live physical customers walking around in your dealership. Before you leave for the day, I want you to look at everybody who has contacted you online and send emails answering their questions. But I want to tell you something very important. About a third of those customers will never read your email. Many of them, it'll go into their junk mail. They'll never see it, and others just won't read it. So you only reach about 2/3 of the customers by sending out the email. So as soon as you hit send, I want you to pick up your phone and call them. Most of the time, you won't get them. They won't answer your call. It'll go into voicemail. And we know that about a quarter of the customers that you phone, you'll never speak with them and they'll never hear your voicemail. So how do you get around this problem? The answer is you have to always both email and call. If you email and call together, you will reach 95% of your customers. Now, in addition to that, if it was my dealership and I didn't get the customer on the phone, I would definitely I'd email, I would try to call them. If I don't get them on the phone, I would text them. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Okay, and if you're ready for the next step, if your dealership is handling the concept of replying to customers once a day, before you go home at the end of the day, and you say, hey, what's the next step? I want to improve our response and improve our web lead close rate even further. What should I do next? The next step is to target emailing and phoning in less than 60 minutes. If that's just not a reality, if you're a small dealership and you're busy delivering a tractor or a bike or working with an employee, don't sweat it. Just do it once a day. But if you're looking for the next step, less than 60 minutes is the target.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Fran. This insight in how we all can make best practices habit is really helpful. And I think there are dealers out there that might be asking, what should they be doing while most of us are sheltering in place?
Good question. This is all new to all of us. And what I would tell you is if shelter in place requirements continue, I would suggest that on your website, you post for sales, you post hours of operation online only, so that the customers know that you're expecting them to contact you online. And also, many of your fellow dealers, maybe some of you as well, have begun remote selling, where you publicize to your customers that you're happy to deliver a vehicle to the person's home. And others are using digital solutions like online applications and DocuSign.
Right. That's some really good insight too. But I saw a question come in asking, how can I keep my sales team motivated to sell? And how do I keep my customers engaged? Which I think is a good question to ask in this time, in this difficult time. So Fran, what's your advice to keep sales managers focused and motivated? How can dealerships, or what can dealerships do, to maintain engagement with their customers?
That's a really good question. So first of all, we just have to acknowledge there are dealerships out there operating business as usual, and there also are dealerships out there that are completely closed down and employees are laid off, and everybody in between. So what I would tell you is if your sales team is at home, I would suggest divvying up your customer list and having your salespeople, or even employees from other departments, they're just people, have them divvy up the customer list and call the customers. Not only would you be building goodwill for the customers, and you may get a good testimonial, but you may also find customers who are ready to buy or who are ready to have service done on their bikes. So start those conversations with your customers. The other thing is you can use FaceTime to do a product walk around, and other video conferencing apps as well. The bottom line that I'll tell you is your customers are locked up at home, many of them, and they will welcome the distraction. And your employees, if you are able to follow this approach and have them call the customers, that your employees will welcome the distraction as well.
Absolutely. So what else can dealers do?
So one part is put more emphasis on the service and parts side of the business. You can tell the customers when your service hours are. You can provide free pickup and delivery of the vehicle. And the last point that I will make as far as what can I do, this really applies today, and it applies anytime. And that is, make sure that you post images online and that you use a price with your listings. And it doesn't have to be a discounted price. If that's not your thing, it can be MSRP. But the point is, you can't leave the price out altogether. There's a 67% improvement in leads when inventory is priced, any price. A 160% improvement in leads on inventory when you use between 1 and 10 actual photos of the unit, not stock photos, and a 260% improvement in leads on inventory with 10 plus photos. And we could add here /video.
Right, that's awesome.
So here's what we've gone through. We've talked about how e-commerce has risen up to be the way that people shop for everything. And if you just stop and think about it, if we were having this webinar even 6 or 7 years ago, we would still have people who would say, yeah, I'm not comfortable ordering things online. Yet today, we order paper towels or toilet tissue, assuming we can find any, from Amazon. So we talked about rise of e-commerce. We talked about how our current situation with the coronavirus is nuts, and some ideas for helping get through that over the next month or two. We talked about what website customers currently experience, how half the time today, the customer who walks out of their door and sees a UTV on a trailer or a tractor on a trailer and contacts the dealership and asks them a question, half the time today, 24 hours comes and goes and they've received no reply from the dealership. We also talked about how if you go ahead and make the effort to reply quickly by both emailing and calling, you end up selling 44% more units to the same number of web customers as the dealerships who do not. And we also talked about some best practices for how you handle the web inquiries.
And thank you for all of that, Fran. So now, dealers, I want to open up for questions. And once more, you can maximize the control panel by clicking on the orange arrow and submitting your questions in the question section. Okay, so we'll take the first one. Fran, is it okay if I text a reply without an email and a call?
Very good question. So Haley, if you and I owned a dealership, we would absolutely use texting with our customers. There's no question. It's so powerful. However, if we all just think about our friends who text us personally, I bet you all have a friend who texts you these long 3-paragraph long text messages and your eyes roll when you get them. That's not really the way texting is used. Texting needs to be short, concise replies. So because of that, I would tell you that email, phone, and texting, all three of them have their place. Use all three of them. You can't exclusively use texting, or you'll be leaving out a lot of things that you can use in emails. And if you try to include them in text, like for example, some dealerships try to include images in text, and sometimes that works, and sometimes it prevents the text from going through.
Right. Okay, another question. Is listing get a quote or call for price better than not listing a price at all?
Very good question at all, and very timely. So what the math tells us, what the data tells us is very, very clear. And that is, if you list a price, any price, you are far more likely to end up closing the deal than if you do not list a price, or if you list, click here to get a quote.
Right, good question, dealer. Okay, so another dealer
Haley,
says, I normally, oh, sorry.
Haley, one more thing.
Sure.
That does not mean that it has to be a discounted price.
Right.
If your brand that you're selling and your reality in your local market allow you to list MSRP, I would absolutely list MSRP. And on the other hand, if the way that you sell your product, you need to have a discounted price, that's up to the way that you need to sell locally.
Absolutely. Okay. Oh, here we go. I normally invite warm leads into the shop, but I'm unable to do so while we shelter in place. What can I be doing to show my warm or hot leads the tractor they're looking for virtually?
Very good question. So what I have heard from other dealerships is that you have to give your sales team something that's dead simple to use. Otherwise, it just won't work. And also, it has to be dead simple for the customer. FaceTime tends to be a pretty good solution. The only glitch with that is, of course, if the salesperson or the customer doesn't have an Apple product. But I would talk with them, with the customer. So talk with the customer. You can, if you have to, you can email images to them, but FaceTime works as long as both parties have an Apple.
Absolutely. Okay, here we go. I have had to lay employees off as of late. How can I keep the store running and keep online leads answered?
So does everybody remember when we used to have Blackberries? So when we used to have Blackberries, I had one myself. It's been a while, but I would type on it with my thumbs. And when I would be typing these BlackBerry thumbs messages, they would be short messages. I can't type very well with my thumbs. And I think of the answer to your question as replying with BlackBerry thumbs, which is to say, if the customer asks a question, get back to them right away with a very simple answer to their question. You don't need to worry about all the other things, but give the customer what they're asking about. So if they ask, how many pounds can I tow with that UTV, or is there a backhoe attachment for that tractor? Just answer them and be a person.
Right. Let's see. Follow-up question from the same dealer, Fran. Can you tell me different ways I can personalize my text messages and email responses? I want to avoid sounding like a robot.
Yeah, so that's also BlackBerry thumbs. So if you think about it, our brethren in the auto industry, they're the ones who got us started with auto responses, which can be very useful, and also with salesperson templates, which is basically a form letter that you send out to a customer that doesn't really answer their question. And if you think about my BlackBerry thumbs term, it's sort of the opposite of both of those. It's actually answering the question. So there is nothing more personal than a reply that is obviously coming from a live human being and isn't a canned template.
Absolutely. Great questions, dealers. These are awesome. Another one for you, Fran. What top of funnel strategies would you focus on in these difficult times to drive people to product pages and ultimately to a contact request?
Gotcha. So I'm not going to address driving the web traffic, but what I am definitely going to address for you is calling the customers. So I'm a huge proponent of calling the customers, because you will find, first of all, dealerships that have been around for any length of time, they have a huge customer list, but yet let's say 80% of those customers they haven't seen in the last year. Yet those customers most likely are still using their tractor or still riding their motorcycle or using their UTV. So reach out to them. The customers won't mind, especially now. It would be a great distraction for them. And I think that will jumpstart a whole lot of business immediately, but also it will jumpstart a whole lot of business a month from now, 2 months from now, 3 months from now.
Absolutely. So a dealer just asked, I'm hesitant to get on the CRM train. Do you have any data that shows that having a CRM in the dealership is beneficial?
Very good question. So CRM is just a tool. So, CRM is a tool that makes it easier to reply to customers and to track the response to the customers from a bunch of people in the dealership. However, if you're a tiny dealership, you can absolutely do the same thing that the CRM system does for a while before you outgrow it. I would tell you that, excuse me, nowadays the cost of the CRM systems has dropped so much that it's hard to stick with, an Excel file or a Word document or however else you would do it manually. But yet there are still examples of dealerships that do a nice job of managing customer relationships manually. So I would tell you that CRM is the tool, but the process of communicating with your customers, that's what's important.
And then another great question from a dealer. Fran, how do you feel about social media communication? I'm thinking about adopting Facebook Messenger to make it easier for my customers to reach me.
That's an interesting question. So let's pause and let's think about something different. Let's think about chat, promised chat. So if we all, let's transition over to the auto industry. If we're going to buy a pickup or we're going to buy a car and we go to a auto dealer's website, about 3/4 of them today will have a little icon that promises the ability to chat live. Now, we Pied Piper measure all of that stuff for the auto industry too. So what we know is about 1/3 of the time that promised chat fails to work. And it fails to work because there isn't a human being live ready to answer your question. And I would tell you that it's worse to promise it and then not deliver than it would have been not to promise it at all. By the way, I'm a proponent of chat. Chat works great, provided it works. I would tell you that social media marketing is the same, where it's not something that you can just put on autopilot. If you want to go down that path, make sure that you have an employee who wakes up in the morning, or employees who wake up in the morning thinking about feeding the machine, and keep a close eye on it so it doesn't go stale.
Right. Okay. And then we've got one last question. My dealership does a really good job with the basics, but what else can we do to improve?
Gotcha. So ILE, Internet Lead Effectiveness, these reports that we provide to dealers, we measure 20 different things. If you think about it, what we've been talking about in this webinar is emailing an answer to the question and calling the dealer. You know, those are 2 things. There are 18 other things we measure. And the reason we have been focused on emailing a quick answer and phoning is because that is so important. That is the bulk of what the customer is looking for. But there definitely are other things you can do to fine tune your replies. We talked about making sure that we list a price for the vehicle. You know, you figure the number one item that positions a product for a customer, that the customer uses to figure out, should I buy this or not, is price. And like I said, it can definitely be MSRP. It doesn't have to be discounted, but there needs to be a price. But a couple other examples of things that you can do. We also measure whether the email attempts to set up an appointment. Now, of course, today it may be difficult to set up an appointment, but normally that's something that the dealership definitely is looking to do. And a couple other examples. Does your email to the customer, does it give them reasons to act quickly? Or are you ambivalent whether they buy now or buy 6 months from now? And then, and lastly, does the email to the customer give reasons why they should buy from you? Does it sell your dealership rather than just the product?
And you know, we just had one question come in I think is relevant for everyone listening, Fran. So I just want to ask this on this dealer's behalf. When it comes to outreach communications, how do you avoid coming off as insensitive to the current situation? Any suggestions for verbiage that is both mindful and effective?
Absolutely. I would be honest. I mean, you figure the customer who, especially if you're in an area that's shelter at home, the customer who is sending that message out, you can imagine what they're going through. But the dealership employee who is receiving it, they're a human being in the local community too. So I would address it head on. I would say, hey, you know, this is crazy, or we're working from home too. Whatever it is, build a, you know, some common ground with the customer.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much, Fran. And thank you, dealers, for taking time out of your day to join us. We really appreciate it. Again, huge thank you, Fran, for being here today and teaching us all ways to stay competitive and sell more stuff. So dealers, please stay safe, stay well, and thanks for tuning in. Bye, everyone.